Hello my beautiful friends, it's Amanda here, and today we're doing a highly requested video. Seriously, over 5,000 people voted in that poll on my Insta stories, so I knew that I had to make this video ASAP. I'm going to be ranking all of my Huda Beauty Obsessions palettes. Now, I don't have every single Obsessions palette ever made, but I do have quite a lot, and these have been a favorite of mine for a really long time. So I'm going to take you through each one of these. We're going to look inside, and just as a reminder, I have reviews with swatches and tutorials with almost all of these palettes. Not all of them, but almost all of them. So I'm going to link those videos down in the description box for you if you want more info, if you want to see swatches. Not going to be swatching these today. My poor arm is still recovering from my last swatch comparison video, but we will look close up at the inside of each one of these palettes, and I'll just give you a quick rundown on my thoughts. I have 21 of the Obsessions palettes, and I have quite a lot of thoughts about these. I have recommended them and they have long been favorites for me. So I'm going to take you through all of my thoughts and feelings on these palettes. And we're going to do this a little bit differently this time. Typically, I split them into least favorites, kind of middle of the road, and then top favorites, which I will do. I think that's a great system for ranking. But I'm going to show you some similar color stories first because quite a few of these have similar color stories, and we're going to compare those. That way I can figure out where I want to sort these as far as those top, middle, and bottom categories. And then I will put it all together and give you my final ranking at the end. Here they are in all their glory, a big pile of the Obsessions palettes, all 21 that I have here. So we're going to go through the similar color groups first. Let's start with the purple palettes. I have Amethyst Obsessions and Purple Haze. Purple Haze has a lot more neutral options. You can see here there's one little row of purples, but it is mixed in there with some dusty neutrals and a couple of sort of berryish reds. And then in Amethyst Obsessions, we have a lot more brights, a lot more bluish purples, some really bright pinks. You can see mine has quite a lot of use in it. Now, I really like both of these palettes, and I'm a purple fiend. If you've watched my channel, then you know I love purple palettes in general. I reach for both of these quite a bit, but Purple Haze doesn't quite have that pop of bright color that I love when wearing purple. Amethyst has these really shifty, beautiful metallics. So Amethyst Obsessions is going to go in my top group, and then Purple Haze will go in the middle of the road group for me. Now we're moving over to the bright red palettes. We have Wild Chameleon, which is not really that red on the inside compared to the outside, but it does have those bolder reds, and similarly to the Ruby Obsessions, it also has some of these peachy supporting type of shades. Ruby also has a metallic purple. There's definitely a similar vibe here, and you can tell just from this close-up that Ruby Obsessions does not have as much love as my Amethyst Obsessions does. I've really, really loved this mix of brights in the Wild Chameleon palette. I like both of these, but it's a pretty easy pick just based on how much I've used them. Wild Chameleons going in the top, Ruby Obsessions going in the middle pack. Now let's move on to a whole bunch of neutrals. We've got a lot of similar neutrals, starting with Sand Haze and the Nude Light Obsessions. Both of these are very soft neutral tone palettes. Sand Haze is a lot more muted color palette. It's not like Light Nude is absolutely bursting with colors or anything, but when you see them side by side, you can tell that Nude Light does have a little bit more of a pop going on, where Sand Haze has a gold and a berry and a mauve. Light Nude has this bright purple, a really shifty pink. It definitely has a little bit more color interest going on, and I really, really like both of these. Honestly, I use them both a lot, but I do prefer these little pops of color, so I have to pick Nude Light to go in the top, and Sand Haze is going in the middle. So we're going to move on to some gold palettes now. We do literally have one that is the Gold Obsessions. Now this Gold Obsessions palette was limited edition. I believe that it's no longer available. I bought mine from Cult Beauty a while back. I do have a video on it. It's pretty. You can tell it's really sparkly and gold. Don't worry if you never got your hands on this one, because it ends up being my least favorite of these three. Spoiler alert. Now let's look at the Brown Obsessions palette. This is the Toffee Brown palette, and honestly, I love a good matte mustard yellow. This is a palette that I've really enjoyed. This is the type of neutrals I like. It has just a little bit of a twist on that basic neutral palette, and I feel the same way about this Wild Tiger palette. This one really snuck up on me and really grew on me. When I first reviewed the Wild Obsessions, this one was kind of meh for me. It was just, you know, the most neutral of the pack. But the more I've used this, I have just grown to love and appreciate this. I'm sure there are a lot of people that look at these three palettes together and think, what are you talking about? These all look exactly the same. And they are similar. That's why I'm comparing them. But of the three, I tend to lean more towards these brighter shades. The Toffee palette and the Wild Tiger palette just have a little bit more saturation. They have these really interesting shimmers. And so I like both of them more than I like the gold palette. Plus, the Wild Obsessions have just been an all-time favorite for me over the past year, so I know that Wild Tiger is going to be in the top. I honestly really enjoy this Toffee palette too, but given the choice, I would pick Wild Tiger over this one just because I love the variation of shades. So these two are both going to go into my middle of the pack group for now. We can always change it later, but for now, those are in the middle. Now we're going to look at some orangey neutrals. I think when you look at the nude medium palette, it looks on its own like the most orangey neutral palette ever, but when you see it side by side with the other two palettes I'm going to compare it with today, this one is actually quite rosy in tone compared to something like the Topaz Obsessions palette, which is very, very orange. This Topaz palette actually looks a lot more like the Caramel Brown Obsessions palette than it does like the nude medium palette. But for comparison's sake, I think they're all similar enough. They're definitely in the same color family. I do think that the Caramel Brown Obsessions palette offers a little bit more richness, a little bit more of a range. Now, these two are very, very similar. I'll admit they look a lot alike. I don't think you need both by any means. I will say I find the caramel palette quite a bit more interesting, and you can notice here these rosy tones coming through with the nude palette. So I would say, just based on my personal tendency towards the shades, towards the metallic finishes, I like the Caramel Brown palette better than the Topaz Obsessions palette. And I do think that this nude medium palette just has a lot more to offer than meets the eye. It's one that I've gravitated towards a lot. So this is the order, top, middle, bottom, that I'm sorting them into for now. Okay, we are going to do some more neutrals. I know, hard to believe, but there are a lot of very nudie neutral Obsessions palettes. There is a wide variety of neutrals, I'll say that, and this Chocolate Brown Obsessions was really one that snuck up on me, much like the Wild Tiger palette. I just surprisingly found myself reaching for it, enjoying it a lot. The complete opposite can be said for this Mauve Obsessions palette. As you can see, I have actually never used it. It arrived with one shade broken. I put it into my stack of Obsessions palettes and completely forgot about it. And it's not in any way needed in my collection. This Nude Rich palette more than has me covered on these Mauve Berry shades. Again, they're very similar. I just feel like it speaks for itself that I have never ever touched this palette. I forgot that I had it. I'm gonna be honest with you. It just does so little for me in my collection that it's automatically going to the bottom of the pile. No offense if this is your favorite palette. That doesn't mean that's bad. It's just not doing a lot for me. So, keep that in mind. This is just one girl's opinion. These are the palettes that really didn't get compared to anything else. There just wasn't anything similar enough within my Obsessions collection to put them into color groupings. So we'll just take a little look at those along the way as well. We have to talk about these pastel Obsessions. These are my absolute least favorite of all of the Obsessions palettes. They look so cute. They look so pretty. They're great to take photos of, like product photos, but in practice, they're just my absolute least favorite formula wise. They just didn't really do much for me. I know a lot of people felt similarly about the Neon Obsessions. I've never had any of those, so I can't really compare them. But for me, these were not good. Sorry again if they're your favorite. I will not take that away from you, and I'm glad you love them. They just don't work for me, and they're just very lackluster. The other two palettes in my least favorite little group here are the Topaz Obsessions and the Mauve Obsessions. So this is how I would rank them, with the Rose Pastel being my least favorite, then Mint, then Lilac, then Mauve Obsessions, and Topaz is sort of the best of the worst for me. These are my least favorite, my least recommended of my Obsessions palette collection. Let's go on to the middle of the road category now. I put 8 palettes into this middle category. I like them. I enjoy them. I think they're nice. I think they're great. I would recommend them, but they're not the most used, most loved, most must-have of my collection. And I'm just sort of going through, looking at these side by side, thinking about how often I've used them, what kind of looks I've done, and some of them were really close. These two, for example, Sand Haze and Purple Haze, I've used them together quite a bit, and I swapped these two back and forth a few times, just thinking about which one would I pick if I had to pick just one of them. And honestly, they're right next to each other in the lineup anyway. Also wanted to give you a peek inside this Khaki Haze palette, since we didn't look at that in the comparison round. Now, I've got my final ranking set. I'm going to take you through the middle of the road now. In spot number 16, we have the Ruby Obsessions. This one's really fine. It's just my least favorite of my reddish palettes. Kind of the same for the Gold Obsessions palette being in number 15. It's just the others I prefer more. Spot number 14 is where it really started to get tough for me. I've just used this less than the others that are ranked above it. Sand Haze and Purple Haze really could be swapped. It's just the purples that made me put Sand in 13 and Purple into 12. I just really gravitate towards purple and really enjoy having that option in a palette. I also went back and forth a bit between my number 11 and number 10 spot, because I do really enjoy this Toffee Brown palette, but I've simply just used the Nude Rich palette more, and it's been a staple for me. It's been something that I grab for travel, and it's just been such a reliable palette that I felt like it was a top 10 palette for sure. And Khaki Haze, we haven't talked about too much, but this is a surprising love for me, and I gave it a great review overall. Now we're moving into the top, the best of the best, we have a couple we haven't seen yet up close. So Wild Python, I wanted to give you a peek inside here. Really bold, really colorful, quite different from all of the other Obsessions palettes that I personally have in my collection. Same for the Wild Jaguar palette. This is more of a neutral color scheme or a muted color scheme, but it's quite smoky. It's really rich. It has a little bit of gold, a little bit of mauve. It's really quite an exciting palette as well. So we're going to start sorting through these now that you've seen the inside of all the palettes. I was kind of surprised when I started sorting through these that all of the Wild Obsessions made their way into my very top group. And I probably shouldn't be surprised because I was over the moon for these when I reviewed them. I just think they're such a special collection of colors, really fun finishes, just something so different, and that really caught my eye. I really hope we get a similarly exciting Obsessions collection this year. I am just on the edge of my seat waiting. As you can tell, I really enjoy these palettes and I use them quite a bit, so that's what I was really thinking about as I was sorting through here. Which ones am I excited to grab? Which ones am I putting in my travel bag? Which ones am I consistently going back to as a companion palette, as a standalone palette? And that's how I came up with this ranking. Now keep in mind, the Nude Rich palette was also in spot number 10 with Nude Medium here in 8. That means all of the Nude Obsessions palettes were in the top of the pack for me as well. Now we have the Wild Tiger palette in number 7. We already talked about this one at length during the yellow gold palette comparisons. And Wild Python, I know this seems like a bold choice for me, but I've been really loving greens lately, and this has been such a great unexpected pop of fun color. Kind of the same with the smokier, more sultry tones in Wild Jaguar. It just feels special, especially in comparison with a lot of these other more similar palettes. I do find this one to be a standout. Now, the Chocolate Brown palette, I actually reach for a lot more than the Nude Rich palette because it's more neutral in undertone, whereas Nude Rich is a lot more reddish toned. And Wild Chameleon, my top 3 all have purples in them. Nobody should be surprised by this. Wild Chameleon has some mustardy shades, some warm neutrals, some purple, so many things that I love. And the Amethyst Obsessions palette is actually very similar in the shades and finishes to my beloved ColourPop It's My Pleasure palette. So it's no surprise how much I have used and loved this one. And I kind of didn't expect this to end up in number 1 for me, but the more I thought about it, I have used the Nude Light Obsessions palette so much. I love that there's those pops of shimmery duochrome colors. I can do a neutral look, I can do colorful looks, I can use it alone or as a companion. It's just really a great, versatile palette. These are my top picks. I love them the most, although I love all of my Obsessions palettes in terms of usefulness and user friendliness and consistent formula across the board, with the exception of the pastels. Okay, let's just try to forget about those. These are some of the best palettes in my collection. I had so much fun ranking them. I would love to hear what you think about these palettes. Do we have any of the same favorites? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Just make sure you keep your disagreements respectful in the comments. Everybody's allowed to have their own opinion here. We're all going to respect that. You guys are really good about that. So thank you for that. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I will see you in my next video. I love your face. Okay, bye.